Okay, so we discussed it quite a bit, and I think we tried to do it maybe in
Sorry,
too much detail. Yes, ma'am.
sorry, could you just quickly tell the others who were in the other rooms what your scenario was about?
Oh, okay. It was like the basics of it was the school prohibits use of phones during class time, but allows learners to bring them to school for break time. And then a learner was texting during class. The teacher confiscated his phone and then read his messages out loud to the whole class. And by what we can understand from the scenario, it was romantic messages to his love interest. And then he took offense very much since he was very embarrassed. He spat on the teacher. He screamed, "I hate you," said she's an idiot. And then he proceeded to use a friend's phone to defame the teacher on social media and the blog of the school. The school then had a disciplinary hearing for the learner and decided to expel him.
Okay,
So that was the basics of our scenario. So what we said, the rights that were present for the learner, since the two people involved was the learner and the teacher, the rights for the learner, his right to privacy was violated since the teacher read his personal messages out loud to the whole class.
I agree.
But he denied himself the right to education by texting during the class time, as well as the other children, since he by texting in the class, the teacher took the time, instead of continuing her lesson, she read the messages instead of continuing with the lesson. Therefore, she or the rights of the other students to education was also violated. But then on the teacher's side, we said that her right to human dignity was violated since the learner spat on her. He yelled at her. He hated her, but also her right to safety because he threatened her with violence. And he slandered her at the end of the scenario by defaming her on social media. So that's what we gathered from the whole scenario. Then I think the third point was, let me just quickly make sure. Okay, evaluate to what extent the various rights were violated. So we said the teacher didn't violate the learner's privacy to such a great extent that he violated her rights. Since when she broke or when she violated his right to privacy, she only did it in the classroom. It wasn't posted on social media. No one outside of the classroom got hold of the messages or the information. But the learner posted the defamed messages on social media for the whole world to see. And we all know when you post something on social media, you can never take it back. So that information was open for the whole world to see.
Okay, so you feel that maybe the learner's rights were not violated that much.
Yeah.
That is an interesting concept, though, because in legal terms, a right is either violated or not.
Yeah.
But rights can be limited. So in certain instances, such as the example of trying to discipline learners, we might limit a learner's rights. So in the case of the cell phone, confiscating someone's property is already encroaching on their right to privacy, because Section 14 says everyone has the right not to have their property confiscated. So that is already a violation, but because we have legislation in the form of the Code of Conduct and the Schools Act, which allows a code of conduct, we can limit the rights of the child in that way. But then whenever we have a limitation of a right, we have to measure it against the requirements that the Constitution gives us in Section 36, to say that not all limitations are fair and reasonable and acceptable. There are certain rules, certain measures that we have to take to make sure. And one of those are, as you have the natural feeling for that extent of how bad was the right violated. In the case of a limitation, we say, how bad do you want to limit a right? And then the Constitution requires us to do the absolute minimum limitation possible to reach the goal that we want, if we have a fair and reasonable goal. So if we say disciplining learners in order to create a disciplined environment in which teaching learning can take place, that is a proper and a good goal. But then our limitation should be as small and as little and as less intrusive as possible. So confiscating the phone would then be fine, but reading out loud the messages wouldn't serve the purpose of providing a more conducive environment for education. So that was not the correct way to go. But confiscating the phone would be a fair and reasonable limitation.
Yeah, we said that in the fourth point where we discussed if the steps that were taken were necessary. Then we said the teacher was right in confiscating the phone, but she didn't need to read the messages out loud. She could have simply informed the parents, and maybe it's the child's second or third offense, and then inform the parents that their child keeps using their phone during the class and it disrupts the whole lesson, and you see it's a continuing problem. That maybe if they can try, and you don't know if it's happening in other classes, but you know in your class it's a problem, maybe they can try and talk to their child, or there can be an arrangement that maybe when he comes into the class he must put his phone in a basket on the teacher's table maybe, and then he can only take it back after class. So we said that.
Okay,
and then the school then had, after everything happened and the learner defamed the teacher, the school had a disciplinary hearing that we said was the correct measures to take, and then following the disciplinary hearing they decided to expel the child. So there might have been other aspects that were also part of the discussion during the disciplinary hearing. So we said that was right, since the steps that they followed, they gave the child a fair chance by defending himself, or hoe kan ek sê, maybe defending himself during the disciplinary hearing and state his case. And then afterwards, they made their decision.
Yeah, your argument makes sense to me. I would maybe not go as far as expelling the learner, because it's not a violent, or well, he was a little bit violent. So then you might be there, but expulsion in South Africa is very difficult, and often the department does not want to enforce expulsion. Because then they have to find another place for the child, which they usually don't want to do. So, and the other thing is, we don't want to take the problems of one learner and just move it from school to school to school. So we'll talk a little bit more about that that type of principles when we deal with learner discipline later on. But in terms of the violation, the child violated the teacher's right to dignity, as you have indicated. And then also spitting on the teacher and threatening the teacher with violence also violates the teacher's right to freedom and security of the person in terms of Section 12. And therefore, since the learner were displaying aggressive and threatening behavior, I think it's fair to have held a disciplinary hearing and at least maybe suspend or try to find remediative action towards the learner, something that will teach the learner to do better next time. Okay, so thank you very much to you for that very thorough feedback. And let us hear who is going to give us the feedback for scenario 2 about the drunken teacher. Okay, Kielboga, you can go ahead. You just have to unmute. You are muted. And remember to just tell everyone what happened in the scenario. Thank you.
Okay. Our scenario that we handled was of a teacher. Looks like they were having sort of like a party in a class, a new teacher that is. So the principal decided to go and check on the new teacher to see how the teacher is doing. And then when he gets there, the class is disorganized and the teacher seems to be tipsy. And then as the principal tries to reprimand the teacher slaps the principal on the buttocks and then makes sexual remarks.
Okay.
So the rights that we said that were violated was firstly was the learner's rights, the right to education, because it's not like the teacher was busy teaching. And then the second one, we said the right to a safe environment, because in the scenario, they said that there were glasses lying around and then it's grade 2 learners. So those glasses might not be safe for them. So we said right to education and the right to a safe environment.
That makes sense.
And then for the teacher, we also felt that the teacher's right was violated, the right to human dignity, because the principal, the teacher disrespected the principal right in front of the learners.
Okay.
Yes. And then we further on said that, okay, maybe the situation was not well handled because the teacher was suspended immediately, whereby there's a certain procedure that needs to be followed before the teacher can be just suspended. So his right was also abused. And then we said that the question was, how could the principal calm the situation? And then we said that maybe get control over the class first, ask the learners to tidy up, and then ask the teacher what it is that's really going on, or ask the learners what's going on to get information as to what's going on. Yes. And then the recommendation that we made was that the teacher, it was a misconduct that the teacher did, but he still deserves a fair trial, or the procedure, the correct procedure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, I think that's about it. Yeah. I don't know if I missed something.
I think you have done it well. I would say that if there's a disciplinary action, whether it's against the learner or a teacher, it means which come into play also the right to fair administrative action. Okay. So that is, I think, Section 33 of the Constitution. So that is another right you could have added. So you do have the feeling that there should be a proper procedure followed, and not following that procedure would violate the teacher's right to just administrative action. So you do have the learner's right to education, which was violated. I agree with your arguments there. I agree with your arguments on the safe environment for the learners. And I agree with your argument on the school principal's human dignity. And I could also add the school principal's bodily integrity, because she slapped him on the buttocks, which is sexual harassment, which is a form of violence. And Section 12 protects us and say that we all have a right to be free from all forms of violence, which includes something like being slapped on the buttocks uninvited. All right, so well done on that one. And then scenario number 3 was the one on extracurricular activities. Victor.
Yes, we had scenario 3. So the school was putting a lot of effort into extracurricular activities for the learners, sport and choir and everything. But then they noticed that some of the kids that come from the township and who rely on transport would sometimes not show up to these activities, to practice or to matches. And then they decided that maybe they should just exclude all of these kids from participating in sports or these extracurricular activities at school. So the rights that we said were violated is equality, and then human dignity, and then we also had freedom of association. And then at number 2, where it says whose rights were infringed upon, we said the learner's rights. And then number 3, where it says, what's number 3 question? Let me just check again. To what extent, and motivate your answer. So we said with equality, we said that now these kids are being treated different than the kids who actually live in town and who do have transport to go to school. So they're being treated like second-class citizens almost, in our opinion. And then with human dignity, many of the kids who can't afford transport to go to these matches on weekends, they already, because they actually kids do want to participate in these activities at school. So we said that it might lead to self-esteem issues, and they might feel less important than the kids from that live in town. And then freedom of association, we said that some of them really might want to be part of a team, but now they can't, because according to the school and the teachers, they are not worthy because they don't show up for the matches or the practices. And then at number 4, where we had to find solutions, we we kind of looked at our own experience at our schools, and we said that many schools, especially these who have the schools who have kids that rely on transport, who comes out of the townships, they have certain days in the week where they have extended school hours, so that, let's say, for example, from 2 to 3:30, it's time for extracurricular activities. And the taxi drivers also know that, so that now when they know that, then they can arrive a bit later to pick up the kids. And then we also said that when they have matches and meet on weekends, we could try and arrange transport with them, because at our school, for example, some families who live in the townships do have their own transport and the means to take their children to the matches. So we can arrange like a sort of a lift club for the kids who really don't have transport. And then, what was the last one? Oh, and then we said communication is very important. If you send letters and programs with dates in advance, then some of these problems might be eliminated.
Okay, great. Well done. I think you have done very well. I agree on all of them. What I would like to point out, though, is when we deal with equality and discrimination, it gets a little bit complicated, because we have different forms of equality. We have substantive equality and formal equality. So formal equality means treating everyone exactly the same way, and all rules would apply to everyone exactly the same. Whereas substantive equality means we take into account the differences between groups of people. So in this instance, we would take into account the difference between those who have transport and those who do not have transport, or those who have safe transport and maybe those who have unreliable and unsafe transport. And then we try to treat them differently so as to remove the disadvantages that prohibit some of taking or enjoying the opportunities that there are. So we can create equal opportunities, but unless we help those with barriers to enjoy those opportunities or to advantage from those opportunities, we won't have equality. So as you have pointed out, there isn't equality, because then some of the learners, they don't have actually access to participate in these activities, which were designed to actually help them grow and develop as full human beings and develop their potential. So equality, perfect. Human dignity, as soon as you violate someone's equality on the basis of their identity, you usually also violate their dignity. The two most often go hand in hand. And if you read court cases, you will see that usually also those two are coupled or cited together in court cases. So definitely your feeling of their dignity being violated is also true, because they weren't treated as equal and dignified human beings. Just uncertain about freedom of association. So let me just see, section 18 says everyone has the right to freedom of association. Just that. I'm not sure though, because we didn't, I'm not sure whether the school prohibited them from associating with a particular group, but in effect, maybe they did, because as you say, if we have two groups, the group who participates and the group who cannot participate, then actually they were forced to not be part of the group who can participate, who are allowed to. So I would say, yes, you are then also correct in that way. And I also like the solutions that you have proposed. Right, thank you very much. And then our very last scenario was on school uniform and the learners who want the school uniform rules to change a bit. Who's going to give the feedback on scenario number 4?
Okay, can you hear me, ma'am?
I can hear you, thank you so much. Right, you can go ahead.
All right.
If you want, you can open your camera so that we can see you.
Yeah, I will open the camera. I'm just reading the scenario first.
Okay, cool. All right.
Okay. The scenario states as follows. The parents of Open Plain 9 School are very strict in terms of the traditional values related to appearances, discipline, and uniformity. A very limiting and prescriptive school uniform is prescribed in the Code of Conduct for learners and strictly enforced by the teachers. A group of learners has come together to petition this state of affairs. They demand that the school rule regarding appearance should accommodate learners who need to wear certain clothing in terms items in terms of their religion. Learners whose cultural and religious practices require them to wear certain items such as strings, bracelets, nose studs, etc. Learners whose natural hair is difficult, painful, or expensive to style according to the prescriptive rule of hair. Transgender learner and learners who do not identify with gender binary. Male learners who want to wear long hair. All right. And to start with, I want to identify with reference to the section of the Constitution the rights that are relevant in the scenario.
Okay.
I think the first right was according to the Constitution, section I think it's section 28. Section 29, if I'm not mistaken, Section 29 of the Constitution of South Africa states as follows: everyone has the right to basic education, including the basic of education, to further, subsection B, to further education, which states through reasonable measures must make progressively available and accessible. And then section 29, subsection 2A, equity, practicability. And then we go back to South African Schools Act 84 of 1996, subsection 7, freedom of conscience and religious at public schools, subject to the Constitution and any applicable provincial law. Religious observance may be conducted at a public school under rules issued by the governing body if such observances are conducted on an equitable basis and attendance at them by 20 learners and members of the staff. We didn't have much time to discuss with regards to the question, but what we identified was that the school was violating learners' rights in terms of section 28, and according to South African Schools Act, the school, in terms of freedom of conscience and religion at public schools, they were violating learners' rights. And in terms of code of conduct, in subsection 8 of SASA, it says subject to application, applicable provincial law, a governing body of public school must adopt a code of conduct for the learners after consultation with the learner, parents, and educators of the school. So we think that perhaps the school didn't consult with parents and learners, because some learners has and religious practice demands wants them to wear bracelets and so on. That's our discussion up to so far. So we think that the policy of the school, when it was drafted, they didn't consult with the parents, learners, and educators.
Okay, you are totally correct. My feedback would be just to be careful when you are asked to identify rights, that you cite the rights and not the process of protecting the rights. So when you say they should consult, that would be at your number 4, to help them to protect the rights. Am I right? For question number 4 said to indicate what they could have done differently. So I agree with you there that they could have consulted before, or maybe consulted and redid a new code of conduct so that they would better protect the rights of the learners. And then something when we talk about school uniform, and especially also cultural rights, religious, the wearing of certain jewelry, certain clothing items, hairstyles, personal ways of expressing yourself, that would all fall under the right to freedom of expression, the right to be free to express who you are, your identity, your ideas, and your beliefs, and so on. There has been a couple of court cases where the court has considered issues with hairstyles, issues with nose studs, and so on, issues with the hijab of the Islam ladies. And the court has time and again, every time instructed the school not to limit or unfairly limit and violate a learner's right to freedom of expression in terms of their culture and in terms of their religion. So we have court cases there to help us in that regard. That is what we know. What we don't know, we did not have court cases in that regard yet, is what about boys who want to wear girls' clothes or girls who want to wear boys' clothes? What about boys who want to wear long hair, but the school says that if you have a penis, your hair should be short, and if you have a vagina, you may have long hair. And if you have a penis, you may not wear a skirt. And if you have a vagina, you must wear a skirt. So those are the type of questions that we don't have answers to, clear-cut answers to yet from the courts. We can argue that in terms of freedom of expression of your identity, if you cannot express your identity and if you are not free to have a particular identity as you identify yourself, if you are forced into a specific gender role or so on, then it might violate your dignity, maybe your equality, if a person who is, say, for example, cisgender can be free to dress according to their gender identity. But if you are maybe transgender, now you are not free to dress according to your own identity. So therefore, there's inequality. So that argument can be made. We don't have a court case yet to inform us how exactly that might be applied in such instances. Do you have a question?
Okay, ma'am. Yeah, I have a question here, ma'am. I wanted to ask with regards to section 10 of human dignity. Was it not violated to section 10? Everyone has the right, has inherent dignity and the right to have their dignity respected and protected.
Yes, I think I agree with you, because as I've said with the previous scenario, usually when there's equality issues, there's usually also a human dignity issue. So we have dignity, we have expression, and we have equality. With regards to the right to education, it's less clear-cut. So we will choose the rights that are more directly relevant. The right to education might be indirectly influenced by the fact that maybe the child doesn't feel free at school, or maybe the child cannot come to school, or maybe the child was suspended due to not having the correct hairstyle or the correct school uniform, and then that would violate the right to education. We must note again, in the interest of good discipline and order and safety, it is recommended that schools do prescribe a school uniform. The very act of prescribing to you what to wear and how to wear your hair and so on is already limiting your right to freedom of expression. So it doesn't mean that we are not allowed to limit the right to freedom of expression, because the Schools Act allows us to prescribe a code of conduct, and we have the national norms and standards related to school uniform, which also gives us a number of rules that we can apply, and who recommends using a school uniform. There's a lot of advantages using a school uniform. Equality, one of them. Everyone wears the same clothes, irrespective of whether you are poor or rich. So there's good reason for prescribing a school uniform. We don't have to say learners can wear what they want and do what they want, and that's not necessary. It would be the ultimate respect for their freedom of expression, but that might create other problems with other rights, such as the right to education, the right to a safe environment, or the right to human dignity. So yeah, we have to balance out the different rights, and we have to do that balancing act when a right is limited. All right. Any questions from your side before we finish off this session, and then we will continue this discussion and also some other issues about the Bill of Rights next week? Questions, comments?
I just want to comment myself and say,
yes,
I love it when we get a chance now and then. I know it can't happen every day. We are not in that space to can be meeting, but it's nice to just come together and have this discussion. It does help a lot. So thank you so much for that.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. That helps me also to know what works and what doesn't work, and what you find helpful and what not. I see a raised hand, Kitches.
Okay, yes, ma'am. We are really appreciative for taking your time creating WhatsApp group. It really made us feel welcomed and aligned with what is happening. But I just have a question. Don't you receive data? Because I heard that other universities, like during COVID and this online, they were receiving data. So I was kind of like questioning whether our institution is also doing the same. Okay, apart from that, we can safely say that we tried by all means to purchase the materials, and we are somehow going to be delayed, but we'll try to push as much as we can just to keep up and be at par with everything. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. With regards to the data, there was a memo from the university that says data is not going to be provided because students have access to the campus. So I think the departure point behind that is that as long as you have access to campus, if you need Wi-Fi, you can come to campus for Wi-Fi. don't think that we necessarily thought of our postgraduate students in that regard, because postgraduate students don't always live on or close or near to campus. A lot of them are like you, working full-time and living not necessarily close to campus. So if you are close to campus, you have full access to campus, where you have Wi-Fi and computers, and you have the research commons in the library and everything. If you are far away from campus, I think maybe I'll just have a word with the BEd Honours Office to ask whether there might be a special arrangement made for students who do not live on campus and who don't come to campus very often during the time of their study. But I'm not sure, because in the past, we've always had our students, our postgraduate students, it's kind of a given that a postgraduate student has data, has Wi-Fi, or some other form of internet access. It is part of your admission requirements that you have devices and access to internet. So it's a little bit different. Postgraduate students are not treated in the same way as undergraduate students. But let me just have a chat with Clea from the BEd Honours Office to see if there is maybe something along those lines. I will give you feedback on that. And then regarding the study material, I've tried to, so I've made, if you go to study unit 1, you will see I have given the links for the 3 articles. So if you don't have the book yet, the articles will help you. And then for study unit 2, if you don't have the book yet, there's section 27 has a basic human rights, handbook of basic human rights or something like that. I'm not sure about the exact title, but it's I've also added the link in the lessons page for you. So that will also help you for the time being until you can get hold of the textbook. But sooner or later, you must have the textbook, because it's a lot of theory. Remember, BEd Honours is a bit on another level. It's not the same as undergraduate. So it's a lot of theory, difficult concepts and so on that is explained in the textbook that you would need to get hold of sooner or later. Okay, then I see Shanaz has a question, and after that, Motlatledi.
Yes, ma'am. I would like to just find out, like, since we're submitting task 1, the due date is Monday, if I'm correct. So how long does it take for us to expect feedback?
Okay, let me just quickly explain this, because this is important. Thank you for that question. We have a range of activities for you. Okay, so not all of them are assessment activities. So some activities are learning activities, which means they help you to understand the content, they help you to unlock the content, they help you to learn. So those are the learning activities. Then some of the activities are assessment activities, but they are not formal assessment, which means they don't count marks. If they are assessment, it would mean that after you have gone through the work, after you have worked through the content, that assessment activity will help you to evaluate your own progress and to see, did I manage to reach the outcomes for this section or not? So those are the non-formal or the informal assessment opportunities. The task that you have for, which one is that? The one for study unit 1?
Yes.
Is a learning, that is a learning task. That is not an assessment. So it's not an assessment, and also it's informal, meaning it doesn't count marks. The only time that we have formal assessments is the assessment A, assessment B, and assessment C. So if anything does not say assessment A, assessment B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or assessment C, 1, or assessment C, 2, then you know it is not for marks. So then it is good for you to do it. It will help you learn. It will help you reach the outcomes. It will help you unlock the content, and it will help you to assess and evaluate your own progress. But if you miss them, It's not a train smash. It's not the end of the world. You can do them later, or you can choose not to do them. I would recommend doing them, but you don't have to stress about them. Please don't stress about them, but use them. They are designed to help you learn better. Does that make sense, though?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. I would also like to find out if anyone does have the articles downloaded, because I struggle to get the two.
Me
They
too.
could just
Also
share on the
struggle.
WhatsApp group, please.
Okay, yeah. You can share them on the WhatsApp group if you don't mind. Those of you who have them at hand, thank you very much. Okay, Mutlatledi, you have a hand raised.
Okay, I just
Am I
wanted to
pronouncing
ask
your
with
name
regard.
correctly, though?
Yeah, you can call me Truth, ma'am.
No, I want to call you on the name that you want me to call you. But just tell me
Yeah,
how to do it correctly.
Mutlatledi.
Okay, all right. So you can go ahead with your question. Thank you.
My question was with regards to the module. Does the module apply to some of the rules of law of persons, law of contract, law of delict, and administrative law, labor law, and constitutional law, human rights, and so on? That's my question.
Yes, the module works with a little bit of everything, basically, because education law is a hybrid field. So it's hybrid because it's not purely this, that, or the other. We take a little bit from each of those different legal fields and we bring them together, because in each legal field, there is something that applies to education. So we have a little bit of delictual law when we deal with school safety. We have a little bit of constitutional and human rights law when we deal with applying and promoting human rights in education. We have a little bit of administrative law in when we work with the Schools Act, the school governing body, and the role of the principal, and so on. And then we have two other modules, the labor law. We don't do labor law in this module. So the in-depth parts of labor law is done in ONWR 624. And then
So
which is one of the electives. Yeah.
So what about the Employment Act? Does it not apply to the module?
It certainly applies to education law, but we don't go into detail about that in this module. If you are interested in labor relations and employment of educators, you should do the elective module ONWR 624, which is labor relations in education. And there they do a lot of, so there they do a lot of labor law. And then if you are interested in human rights law and democracy, you should take the elective module ONWR 625, which is an in-depth look at human rights, constitutional and democracy and democratic school governance and so on.
Thank you very much, ma'am. You have cleared it.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, guys? Okay. If you are happy, thank you for joining me. And I hope you have a good week. So then we see one another next week at the same time. Is that fine? Okay, great. Have a good weekend. Bye.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye, ma'am.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.